Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Loksatta Live, the series of debate and discussion about various things of importance to our nation. Today we're going to talk about education, and education being a very vast subject, we are going to have a multiple talks on this, and this is the first first edition of the talk on education, if you will. I'm very pleased to inform you Dr. Jaiprakash Narayan and Dr. Ashwin Mahesh are with us. And as always, we have hundreds of questions coming in from across the world. So today we'll try to stick to policy and see how government policy and public education are coming in. Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to Loksatta Live, the series of debate and discussion about various things of importance to our nation. Today, okay, so let me start with Dr. JP. Dr. JP, this is something that everyone knows, and we are all struggling to understand this about the pathetic state of public education in India. And you always proudly say that you had your education in a government school, that too in a Telugu medium government school in a small village, and you went on to medical school and IAS and all of that. But you wouldn't be very comfortable sending your own children to a government school today. What happened? What do you think happened in these years?
Srinivas, to give an answer in a nutshell, long ago I went back to my school. I kept going once a year or so. I asked my school peon or attendant or whatever. He was a young man when I was a kid. And by the time I met him much later, he was an old man about to retire. I asked him, Ramulu was the name. Ramulu, what happened to the school? How come the standards are so poor today? He gave me a very succinct reply, what we would all say in great detail with a lot of evidence and logic, etc. He gave very succinctly. He said, Babu, once the farmers of the village stopped sending their kids to the school started declining. To put it in a more complicated way, the stakeholders no longer wielded power. The parents of children who are going to those schools, they no longer had any power because essentially the poorest of the poor and from the lower caste, they alone started sending their children to the government schools. And the people who had the voice and the power and influence and passion in society and means, they no longer were sending their children to government schools. There could be many reasons. I don't think that's important to go into a great detailed analysis of what happened, why it went wrong. But just to put things in perspective, in various states, I think various things happened, but the net outcome was somewhat similar. I'll give you the picture in the Telugu land. Now, two states, therefore, I can't say one state. First, one populist chief minister said no examinations and no detention. Instead of saying that the examinations be more sensible, and actually, during our childhood, examinations were pretty sensible. They were not really a great stressful event for most of the kids. But nevertheless, instead of improving the examinations and evaluation, they simply stopped the examinations. Over a period of time, because there was no evaluation and measurement, and because nobody was monitoring what was happening, naturally the quality slowly began to slide. Simultaneously, as prosperity crept up, English medium schools became more affordable to more and more people even from villages. And therefore, everybody who had ambition for their children started sending their kids to English medium schools, paying a decent fee, hoping that their children would get a head start. Eventually, once the stakeholding and power wielding are separated, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The schools actually declined. Initially, they were not really bad at all. They actually declined. And sadly, with the proliferation of education and the private sector, the quality of schooling in private sector did not improve either. Apart from the injustice of it and the need to have to pay out of pocket, apart from all those economic consequences, the quality simply was pretty grim in private sector too. Most of us don't realize it because our kids tend to go to some of the better schools. And we pay a lot of attention to them, give a lot of time and energy, and make enormous efforts to inspire them, to motivate them, and to go the extra mile to give them a head start. So we feel it's a normal thing. But in reality, 90% of the kids going to even private schools are in disarray. The evidence is pretty clear. All of us Loksattans understand it, but for those who may not be familiar, I'm only quickly going to recount. The ASR surveys, annual status of education reports, which started in 2005. Pratham is the pioneer of that. Pratham is one of the leading NGOs in the education sector in India, Bombay based, but spread across many parts of the country. At Madhav's request, Pratham's founder, uh, Montek Singh Ahluwalia and I, both of us, released the first report in 2005 in Delhi. The reports have been consistent across the board in the past 10 years, and they make very grim reading. In seventh grade, roughly 30 to 40% of the kids are not able to read a passage in their own language. Second grade, difficult. And in seventh grade, roughly 60 to 70% of the kids are not able to do a simple arithmetic division. And things are pretty appalling. And in private sector and public sector, there's not much of a difference. There's a marginal uh, improvement in private sector, very marginal. Substantially because parents pay the money and therefore there's some degree of accountability, some pressure on the schools to perform. Otherwise, it's not really significant. Recent survey, global survey, the PISA, also revealed a very similar picture. And to our shame, as we all know by now, we are 74th, 73rd out of 74 countries. And the response of Government of India is shamefully to not participate in the next survey. Therefore, in the 2012 survey, India did not even participate because then nobody will be able to point a finger at the government or the schooling system of education. And the Right to Education Act is a fraud on the people of this country. Certainly, focus on infrastructure is required, but nobody needed an act or constitutional amendment in order to give education. There's not a word about the quality of outcomes and accountability in the Right to Education Act. And private sector is seen to be an enemy rather than an effort to see how best to collaborate with the private sector and engender some kind of a competition and better outcomes. So we have a very, very critical situation. If we don't address this, I don't think we can really change the economy of the country, nor the polity of the country or society of the country. And just for the reasons of discussion, I would say there are a few things which appear to be relatively simple, easy, and self evident. The first and easiest thing is we have evidence, significant evidence to show that about 70% of the schools in the country, and I'm essentially talking about school education, particularly primary schools, they have fewer than 30 children. You don't have a minimal school institutional environment, and therefore there is simply no capacity to deliver, nor any monitoring, nor any kind of incentive to deliver. That's why, curiously, the secondary schools in government sector seem to be slightly better, only marginally, but they are slightly better than the primary schools. And the parents who actually send their children to private schools at the primary level, some of them at least tend to send back their children to government schools at the secondary level because there's an institutional environment. Our notion that the school must be in the backyard and very close to the people's homes is a very silly notion because the poorest of Indians are sending their kids 10, 15 kilometers away, paying a fee, hoping that their children will get an opportunity. A recent accident in Andhra Pradesh, in Telangana state, in I think it was Medak district, where the poorest of the kids died while they were being transported to the school 10, 15 kilometers away, is a standing testimony to this practice. Therefore, distance within reasonable limits is not a big issue. If necessary, we can give transport subsidy. But consolidation of schools appears to be the smallest, the simplest, easiest way to make a beginning. The second is competition between public and private sector, treating a child as a unit in terms of funding, and therefore not really funding the teachers in private schools, but funding the children in private or government schools. And if they go to private schools, you give them X amount. Right now, in most of India, we are spending 20,000 rupees per child per year in school education from the government for those in government schools. Supposing we say 10,000 rupees is what we pay for a private fee to start with, private education. For those who believe that the private education is better and there's an opportunity available. Provided the school is carefully monitored, there is standard outcomes are guaranteed, they be measured regularly. And the parents then have a choice. The expenditure will not be enormous. You can actually cut down on government expenditure because the government school expenditure per capita tends to be much higher. But we can
Yes.
get better outcomes. And government is much better in monitoring and creating incentives than actual delivery. And therefore, you can play with this formula in a variety of ways because there is a phenomenal interest among the civil society players, the middle class youth, well educated young people, and others. They are willing to do anything. You see Asha volunteers, you see Pratham volunteers, many others. The finest kids in India are willing to devote 2 or 3 years of their lives, the prime of their life, without expecting or anticipating any financial rewards, merely because they feel excited about the idea of educating young children. There is one sector where there is tremendously vibrant activity. The government simply did not understand it or recognize it. The Right to Education Act and others simply completely failed to understand it. Therefore, the second one is public-private partnership in a judicious way with competition. The third one is better evaluation systems. I know stressful examination is not something any of us want, but not having any kind of monitoring and evaluation is a very silly way to approach education or any other enterprise for that matter. And examination can be very intelligently designed in a manner that it actually can be fun and test the capacity to understand and to some extent apply the knowledge at the school level and without any stress in terms of rote learning and memory and so on. And
I'm
with that,
sure it's very
improvement are
important.
corrected locally and globally. The fourth is accountability. I keep giving the example of California schools and elsewhere all over the world. Wherever the parent-teacher committees or school district boards or something else is doing well, wherever the school has become the center of the community's life, there is a remarkable improvement in the quality of educational outcomes. And we have to bring that back in a variety of ways. We have to experiment with our own school district boards, encompassing both private and public schools so that the quality of education is monitored. Public funding is available to private schools, other public schools, and complete autonomy is available to the district board in terms of management of the schools, not in terms of curriculum and evaluation. Obviously, that has to be at a higher level, but management of schools need not be at a higher level. And the fifth element is teacher training. While in public systems, we do choose in a competitive manner some of the better teachers among the available lot. On the whole, our teachers leave a lot uh, which is uh, which is simply not available. There's a lot to be desired. While they're graduates in schools in colleges, they simply don't have conceptual clarity because their own school education was very flawed. We can easily overcome that by judicious orientation programs, and there are educational experts who understand this, and they know where the lacuna are, and they can help the teachers overcome this. And finally, we have to utilize technology like the khanacademy.org and a variety of other means because increasingly now with broadband availability etc if there are deficiencies in terms of education and delivery they can be at least to some extent overcome though there is no substitute to a teacher student direct interface but wherever there is a need we can also use it as a supplement to see that education is significantly improved. We can do
Yeah,
it,
we have
but the demand side is strong, and this is the last point I want to make. The demand side is very strong in India. The fact that the poorest Indians, the rickshaw pullers and vegetable vendors, are willing to spend huge sums disproportionate to their incomes in order to give their children a chance is actually a great tribute to our society. It gives us a tremendous opportunity. It's just that everybody wants success, but we define success in a very bad way. All we need to do as a public system is redefine success and create the right kind of incentives and competition so that the success is much more assured in a much larger proportion and the children of this country get what is their due. And if we don't do it quickly, the dangers are obvious. Not only are individual children stunted, potentially the children unfulfilled, but A, the caste system and inequalities will be perpetuated no matter what we do to our economy and quality otherwise. B, there will be tremendous social strife because people of India are not going to accept their lot meekly as they did 50 or 60 years ago because technology and opportunity now showed them what is possible in their lives if only they get these chances. Therefore, they're not going to keep quiet. There will be tremendous social strife. See, our polity also cannot be transformed because there has to be citizenship. The notion of citizenship ingrained in education. The reason why we messed up in our democracy is we fail to tell our children the basics of what democratic self-governance is about. And it has to be integral to the whole education curriculum and evaluation. And finally, our society itself will continue to be messed up. Even just the other day, I was trying to do some simple arithmetic. The fact that we continue to be the largest repository of gold in the world, we probably have 20,000 tons of gold, mostly in private sector at homes. In the world's poorest country, in terms of the number of the poor people and the abject poverty they are in, is incredible. The fact that in the poorest country on earth, the weddings cost typically, even for the very poor families, 5 to 10 lakhs. For the middle class families, a few million rupees. For the lower middle class families, probably crores of rupees. Yes. All this is lack of complete understanding of how to reorder your life. And that's what education is about. How to marshal your resources and be healthy and happy as an individual and as a society. Therefore, I don't think any of us needs any lecture on the importance of education. Oftentimes, we forget so obviously self-evident propositions. It's not merely about giving them a smattering of English or a bit of arithmetic, but it's much more. And our economy, our polity, our society depend on that. This is a low-hanging fruit because the demand side is very strong, and nobody seriously opposes it except that the governments don't pay serious attention to it. And I believe the judicious application of mind, together all of us, not only in Loksatta, but there are many educationists who are participating in this program now itself, who made a commitment for a lifetime, who made enormous sacrifices to educate thousands of children, made them their own children. They're willing to do whatever it takes to make this happen. And I think all of us together as a nation haven't really worked hard enough to really make this a reality. And it's time that we started this. I don't think even the current government, however is committed it is deeply to economic growth, understands the importance of quality education for the poorest to the poorest. And I think we must shout from the rooftops and make this happen as fast as possible. Thank you, Srinivas.
Thank you, Dr. JP. Ashwin, I know how you think about RTE, and I also know how you think about policy making in this country. So what has been your learning, and where do you think we need to go next?
If you, at a canvas level, there's a lot of things that JP said, which together form the substance of what the response should be. But what we have seen repeatedly in the country is that on many issues, we either don't have the readiness or the capacity to respond at the canvas level. We tend to respond instead at the level of what can be done today at the local level in a limited way in some particular jurisdiction. And we sort of try to somehow manage in that ad hocness. While all the things that he said are important, I don't think that we're going to be able to get started with all of them together. There's a basic dishonesty. What is the basic dishonesty? The government operates with the view that it knows what education is and nobody else knows what education is. This is number one. Second, the government sort of sticks to the view that it will never measure anything lest anybody find out that it doesn't know what education is. So between these two, there is a complete cycle of both dishonesty and non-performance. First you tell yourself, I know everything. Then you tell yourself, I am not allowing myself to be tested so that you can never find out that I actually know nothing. So this is the paradox in which the government is operating. And this is what we need to get out of, first and foremost. First and foremost, we must argue that parents have the highest degree of choice in the educational system. Not the Sarkar, not the education minister, not the certainly not the Secretary of Education, and certainly not any blocks at the local level. Fundamentally, if we do not introduce choice into the system, we're going to find again and again that we're sort of focusing on inputs all the time and no one is looking at outcomes. The government is always telling you, I'll give you a bench, I'll give you a uniform, I'll give you a school building, I'll build some toilets, I'll buy books, I'll even appoint all the teachers, I'll pay their salaries. The only thing you're not going to get as a result of all this is an education. So this has become the reality of what the school system is like. There is also dishonesty about costs. Even when the government, even within the limited framework of the RTE, the government doesn't reimburse schools anything like the true cost of education. The government says in some states they have fixed something, they have something called a fee committee. And this fee committee has fixed the annual fee at 7,000 rupees. But the government itself is spending 15 and 20,000 rupees in its public education system. How can the fee committee go around telling the private schools that they must teach at 7,000 rupees? And there's also another kind of dishonesty, because in government itself there is a hierarchy. There's a distinction between one kind of government school and another kind of government school. When the costs of education are computed for the purposes of reimbursing other institutions, we should be looking at the Kendriya Vidyalayas and not at the general Sarkari school, that is not the corporation schools or the true Department of Education schools. The Kendriya Vidyalaya is also a government school. I also went to a government school for a few years, but it was not the kind of thing that we normally talk about as a government school. It was the army school, which operates much more like the Kendriya Vidyalaya. And in the army school of the Kendriya Vidyalaya, the cost of education per child is not 11,000 rupees or 12,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees. It's much closer to 45,000 rupees. If we accept within the government system itself that quality comes only at those kinds of numbers, why do we find it so hard to accept that even in the private sector such numbers are necessary, or in every government school such numbers are necessary? So the government is deeply underfunding education. It uses its numbers to beat down the cost of education that it is willing to accept from the private sector, and between these two the entire system is totally captured. This dishonesty has to be overcome first and foremost on the finance side. On the measurement side, we have to know what children are actually learning. As JP said, the ASER report has been saying for the last 12 years that children are simply not learning anywhere near their grade levels. I remember when we did the first report, we would go to the education secretary and said 7th standard children are learning at 2nd standard level. And his standard response would be, you didn't do the measurement right, you didn't do the survey right, you didn't do this right or that right. So we would tell him, okay, tell what all things need to be done right, we'll do the damn thing again and come back to you tomorrow morning. When we did the survey the next year and came back, what did we find? The exact same things. And by then the secretary had changed, so a new secretary will come and say, you didn't do the survey right, you didn't do the form right, and all of these kinds of things. There is a tremendous lack of competence, a basic decency, a basic honesty towards wanting to make children's lives better. This is not a structural problem, this is a moral problem. If children are begging on the streets, you can't think of that as an enrollment problem. It is a moral problem. And unless we get leadership at the national level and at state level and even at local levels, that first and foremost acknowledges that parents must have a role, that the true cost of education must be met by the state either directly in its own school system or by provisioning other schools at that level of education, or even by giving money directly to parents, as JP was talking about. If we don't do these basic things, we're going to find again and again that we stumble on the thing. One third piece that is missing is this regulatory boards, or not even regulatory boards, this affiliatory boards. Central Board of Secondary Education, ICSE, State Board of this and that and that. Most people are bored of these things. These are they're rightly called boards. But in the reality, in the real world, nobody would trust these things as having anything to do with education. An honest measurement of performance of institutions run and affiliated to these boards will clearly indicate how far they have fallen from what guarantees they were supposed to provide for the people. There is a much better way to do it. Let the government have the guts to say, here are the 20 best schools in Karnataka. Here are the 20 best schools in Telangana. Let them self-certify what educational standards should be. After all, if you are willing to recognize that these are the 20 best schools in Telangana or Karnataka, why should you have any trouble with them setting the standard for what education should be? So start from schools that you acknowledge to be good. Let them have a self-certification basis. And in fact, it will be in their own interest to set standards high enough that they can meet as well. And on that basis, you create outcomes. You say, okay, everybody will take a test, and on standardized testing, there will be data that will reveal how schools perform. You link that to both funding, and you link that to the appointment of teachers and school administrators and all other kinds of people. And you let that data drive the system, and parents will love this. Today, parents have no faith at all in the government system. Ordinary people, lower middle class people in cities are sending their children to schools at their cost, incurring extraordinary cost. We need to get away from this nonsense. We are completely just in a very, very, very unforgivable level of dishonesty. We are cheating close to 200 million children in this country. There are about 270 to 280 million children who ought to be of school-going age. Less than 60% of them even take the high school exam. Less than half of them pass the high school exam. And less than half of those who pass are considered employable by any employer in the country. not more than 10 to 14% of children going through the public education system are considered to have made it through the system. This dishonesty, if we don't acknowledge and overcome, we're going to keep going around in circles.
Okay, thank you, Ashwin. The International Telecommunications Union reports that now in 2014 there will be more cell phones than people on this planet. The UN says there are more cell phones than toilets in India. Anyone who knows Jyoti Tyagarajan, our subject matter expert in education, will tell you that there is more people that know Joe or Jyoti Tyagarajan than there are cell phones and certainly toilets in this country. Jo is an expert educator. She has taught for decades in India and in Africa, in many countries, and is now running an education NGO. My question to Jo is, Jo, there was a time when the cream of India went to government schools, and like Dr. JP said, the quality of education is degraded now to the point that we wouldn't dream of sending our kids to these schools. In places like Kenya and Zambia, where you've worked and you followed education in countries like Finland, where they've had a remarkable turnaround, what is different? Why is it that our public schools have degraded while public education in other places have attempted to be improved or are in a better shape? Can you comment on that, please?
Hi everybody. I'm a very simple mathematics and physics teacher, and I hope you will see me for what I am and not policy level decisions, but I have certain ideas about what is going wrong on the floor of a school. Now, Dr. JP hit it by saying that the schools that are successful have a school and parent combination that actually makes that helps the kids forward. It's not unusual because we say it takes a whole village to educate a child. Ashwin hit it when he said it was more than just a job, it was a moral engagement, and that is how the problem is sorted out. It can be sorted out. I lived and worked in Kenya and Zambia, and I noticed that the best students, the movers, the shakers, the public heavies, all come from public schools. The other thing I noticed is that all public schools were roughly of the same level. For example, all the Kenyan presidents and now deputy presidents come from one called the Starahe Public School. Of course, Starahe says this, so I don't know if it is exactly true, but certainly public schools give a maximum amount of successful people out into the workplace. 40 years ago, I went to a government college. Our ex-Loka Ayukta, Justice Santosh Hegde, went to a government school. The system was not broken then. It's broken now. There are no two questions about this. It is broken now. The point is that I've walked through lots of government schools, and we still have some stellar teachers there in government schools. The teachers that really struggle are the teachers that are in the lower end private schools. And more, it is clear that we haven't invested in our teachers. And what is even more important is we don't seem to be investing in our curriculum. This is one problem. The other problem is that I don't think education is equitable. Whenever I'm pushed to a corner, I usually use a physics example, so I'm going to do that once again. When a system starts to list to one side, then physics takes over, then like a ship that tilts, it will sink. When good schools started to be the private schools and the government schools started to underperform, the whole school space started to tilt. Now, if policy had stepped in and corrected this list, it would have made it equitable. Then it would have floated up, much like a ship. I'm suspecting that it is this non-equitability that that makes it list like this. I do have a solution for it, and maybe it will come in on a later question, but I don't think we have to go back to reinvent the wheel. I noticed that Finland did a great job of this. And I don't know, Tara, if you want me
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you if you could say a bit about Finland and also talk about your approach to how you would bring more equitability to schools. I mean, clearly there are excellent schools in India. They may be private schools. And clearly we have a problem at the low end with lots of government schools doing poorly.
Yeah.
So how do we, so it's possible, but we have to replicate that and we have to scale that.
Yeah.
Both in terms of content and teacher quality and outcomes.
Yeah.
So say some about that, please.
Okay. Instead of reinventing the wheel, I've been following a little bit of what Finland has been doing with its education system. In the 1970s, when I was just finishing school and I was going into college, a couple of Finnish people actually came to India as part of some, I suspect it was early incursions into Nokia or whatever, but a couple of kids were in my class and they didn't think Finnish education was anything great to write home about. In fact, they thought it was right on line with the school that I was going to. So if it was not successful in the 70s, what actually happened? I think they stepped up. They built rather ambitious goals. They put in place highly productive systems. And most importantly, they put in equitable systems. They built teacher capacity so they could have decentralized assessment systems. If you have teachers that are very fine teachers, you can leave the somewhat sticky job of assessments to the teacher, because the teacher knows best about the student and the teacher has the high moral capacity that Ashwin talked about to actually make successful assessments of students. So what they did, in my view, they set aside inequality in education. And if you look at Finland now, there's only they have an accreditation scale, and they think that they have a 5% difference in the top performing and the bottom performing schools. Most other countries.
Joe, I had a question about that.
Yeah.
And I've sort of seen this I saw this in Brazil, I've seen this in other countries too, where they've got schools that are able to bring up poorer kids into a reasonable degree of education. But you know, in Brazil, there was a lady who told me she had been educated at one of the top universities in the country, and she said, one of the reasons I'm able to go and serve in a public school in a very poor neighborhood and be effective over there is that I live my life in Portuguese, and so does this family. In India, there is a skew. The elite are not living their lives in the language in which the poor are being taught. So for a very large number of people who are elite or well educated, their capacity to teach somebody else in the local language is itself suspect. There's a lot of stuff that you know. I'm wondering how many people like you or I would be able to teach the things that we know in the language in which the poor are learning.
Yeah. So Ashwin, funnily enough, Finland has a huge number of immigrants. And in spite of having this number of immigrants, they are still able to teach successfully the whole school because they have the teachers. They've invested in the teachers and they've cranked up teacher ability to that level. And that's not easy to do, and that's not something that can happen in 2 years or 3 years. It needs a sort of turnaround time of about 10 years, but it'll happen if we keep our nose to the grindstone and make it happen. By the way, most other countries have about 33% difference between schools. So if you go into the US of A, you'll find schools that are 3 times better than schools that are not performing. I'm frightened to even ask this question. What do you think is the difference between our worst school and our best school? I don't even want to go there. You know, so there's a policy analyst called Pasi Sahlberg. I'm sure people have heard about him. He's done a lot of policy stuff for the UN and certainly the Finn government. And he has a 5-point thing with this. He says modern curriculum Equity is very high on the list. It should be financed publicly, according to him, and I don't know why. Maybe you or Dr. JP can give me more understanding on this. He says good quality, that's not a surprise. And he says large participation, which means the greater number of kids that come into the school umbrella, the better it is. And he adds on a small codicil which says reasonable cost. I'm sure reasonable cost in Finland is quite unreasonable cost in India, but there you have it. Now, we don't have to cookie cut the solution, I don't think, but it could be a start. But it needs a group of really heavyweights to sit down and start to pull apart our curriculum and put it together again. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can use the format, but build on it, make it current for us is what I'm thinking. We are doing something about this. I've started a trust, and we've started to deliver something like this. And I don't know if people are tired of hearing my voice, and I can tell you a little bit later, or I can tell you now. So your call.
Go ahead, Joe. Just mention that. Please.
Okay, so I'm really very persuaded by equitable. I'm very persuaded by the word equitable in everything, most of all our school system. Now, we've set up this trust called the Meghshala for obvious reasons, because the school runs on the cloud. It will provide cloud-based teaching system in all Indian languages. So basically, we are writing it in English because that seems to be, sadly, this group's first language. We are then going to translate it into all the major languages. And does it hit all of the high points that Pasi Salberg talked about? Is it equitable? Yes, because it reaches everybody and they are taught in the same way. Is it high quality? Well, my goodness, we're trying very hard to make it very high quality. Will it have large participation? Yes, because it's on the cloud. Anyone who wants it can download it. But will the present government have, it has a vision for education, and we hope it includes large participation. Is it modern? That's a tough one, because if it is too modern, then it scares the teachers away. And if the teachers put it down, then it won't reach the kids. So we are taking tiny, tiny steps in the beginning and bigger steps later. So we are trying to modernize it, but not too much to frighten teachers away. By our perception, we think it could change. Indian education could change, not in 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, but it will change if we stay the course. As long as really political smarts are with us and course correction are made along the way. But most of all, as I said, we must have political smarts and we must have political will. Then it will happen. But the solution is almost there, and I should share it in more detail, but maybe this is not the place to do it. But it looks very robust, and we are very proud of it.
You know, Joe, if you look at examples like Sikshana or what Akshara has done in some schools, and where we have had mentors working closely with even thousands of schools. Yeah. What we see is that with very little money, it is possible to improve the quality of outcomes quite a bit. Yeah. Right? For $200, Sikshana was able to improve the quality of outcomes by 30%. $200 per year is a very small amount of money. But what it also tells you is that unless you have people with an empathetic connect to the child in the schools, it's not possible. It's not simply a matter of the resources. It's also a matter of saying, I am somebody that cares about the children in this community, in this neighborhood, in this school, and they can count on me to hold their hand and steer them through this process of uplifting themselves. And in fact, the main reason we're not able to move into the skilling arena properly is that there's nobody with that empathetic connect to go and tell these kids, go into skilling programs. So you create a million skilling programs, but nobody's able to get the kids into the skilling programs because that empathetic connect is missing in scale.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And is Tara asking me to?
No, I have a question for Dr. JP. Switching a little bit back to policy.
Yeah.
Dr. JP, if you were in the HRD ministry, what are the 2 things you would change about RTE?
The first thing is there must be very deliberate focus on evaluation and quality of education. RTE does not even talk about it. Actually, it's a sin in RTE to think of examination, evaluation, and money. The second thing is the private sector is taken as sinful and totally unnecessary and to be either discarded or to be completely stifled by licensing. And this notion of 25% of the children to be in the elite private schools to be nominated by the government or to be taken from the poor category and the government will fund them, it's a laughable one. It's a joke. It's a classic socialist mumbo jumbo without any outcomes. Instead, I would say 25% of the total funding in public education through RTE will go towards innovative programs involving public-private partnership. Now, the state should be free to design them as they please, depending on local circumstances and flexibility. And because a large number of private non-profit initiatives are coming up in the field of education, with this kind of incentive and flexibility, I'm sure within a few years, dramatic outcomes are possible. These 2 are the easiest things to accomplish, and they need to be accomplished.
So tell me something. In the several decades ago, education was a highly politicized and emotive issue to the point that something like a midday meal scheme sort of swung MG Ramchandran into power, and also dramatically in a period of a decade increased the literacy rate in Tamil Nadu, for example. It went from 60% to close to 80%, right? Just in a span of a couple of decades, and can be largely credited to this. How come education is not such a political issue and not the focus of freebies or incentives or any of the programs from one end of the spectrum of the despicable freebies and incentives to the other end of genuine reform? How come education is not being used as a political and electoral tool anymore by candidates?
A great question, Lala. There is phenomenal demand for quality education, but it's not a political demand. It used to be a political demand. Let me again be a little anecdote. When we were all kids in our generation, in villages in coastal Andhra, for instance, the parents cared so much for education that local leadership focused entirely on education. The credibility, the support base, the reputation of these local leaders was entirely based on what they did for school education. Because the notion of education in general can never be a political demand in a country like India. The notion of my kids' education in my village school or my town school is always a politically profitable. Because we took away the ability to manage the schools or to improve the schools at the local level. What we call provincialized. Initially, it used to be actually managed by district boards, Jilla Parishad, whatever name you called it. Now you took them away and provincialized everything because the pressure from teachers, not to pay salaries from the state exchequer. You centralized everything, and people no longer feel education is about their kids' school. Education is just another head in the budget. So unless you sort of localize it, I'm not saying necessarily to transfer everything to local government, but some kind of school boards or whatever, so that the community feels that my political involvement in education makes a direct impact on my children's future. I don't know how we're going to make it a politically relevant issue, because it is a politically vital issue in India, but we killed it. It still is a huge issue, but because people gave up on the government's capacity to deliver for their children, they no longer think that the government really has an obligation to provide good education. Not one of us here seriously feels that government has an obligation in respect of our children. Sadly, even the poorest parents have come to the same conclusion, and they have given up on government. Actually, it's a terrible sin. We somehow made our people think that government has no role in education. Somehow we'll figure out. We'll get some ration, we'll get some free power, free whatever. but education is longer. So education is hugely respected and valued, but it's no longer believed to be government's responsibility, even by the poor. And that's where we really have to have breakthrough. And that's where there are two things, as a response to the very insightful comments of Ashwin and Jyoti. About costing, Ashwin, my appeal to our group is let's not be over optimistic. India is spending roughly about 3% of the GDP on school education right now. And while 67% is ideal, let's not be unrealistic. There's no way that's going to happen in the near future, the next 10, 15 years. Therefore, how do we make the same rupee go farther? Particularly because in the public system, typically 20,000 rupees is the cost per child per year. In the private system, except a very few decent schools that our children go to, 80 to 90% of the schools, they charge and they spend only about 7 to 10,000 rupees per annum. That 7,000 could make 10,000 rupees or even 12,000 rupees, but let's not now expect 40 or 50,000 rupees on par with central schools. But if the 10,000 rupees is wisely used to start with, and later, once the people understand the value of it, we enhance the budgetary allocations. Then there's something doable, because the moment you talk about hundreds of thousands of crores additional allocation, that itself becomes a stumbling block in any kind of intervention. The second is one great political opportunity that's available in the country, which no major party is utilizing, is this whole vouchers concept, what Ashwin talked about, the competition between public and private providers. Probably India is more ready, Indian society is more ready than any other large society in the world. There will be absolutely no resistance in the people. There will be complete acceptance. There will be a bit of murmur and protest from the teachers' unions, but not really much, because even they are sending their children to private schools, and therefore the moment that is exposed, it is impossible for them to create a problem. I think the voucher system must be politically saleable because the demand side is strong. And maybe together we can take up one private initiative, and that is, can we see that the initiatives of Jyoti and Khan Academy, etc., they are quickly made accessible to all of India in terms of language. For instance, I know for a fact that Khan Academy is willing to license anybody free, any credible group, to translate their content into the local languages and utilize that. Technology is easy stuff. It's only translation. I'm sure we can find at least in a few languages in India to start with, a few people who will do that job. Earlier, actually, I wanted to constitute a group with E.A.S. Sharma to chair, but none of them showed much initiative, and I didn't have the energy at the time. But I think if a team really works on that, this is one low-hanging fruit from the private initiative. Merely make available the content, and let's see what happens. The public initiative, can we persuade the government at least to have a testing board, just to evaluate on a sustained basis, a testing board at the state level, maybe at the national level. These two things, and the voucher system, somehow if we make it politically attractive to the states and for the union government, I think we're getting somewhere. But don't be over-optimistic about resources. I simply don't think that there is fiscal flexibility today in the country to be able to commit another 100,000 crores or 200,000 crores as a country in public sector education annually. It simply will not happen. We have to make do with what's available, and as Jyoti hinted, when private sector is willing to pay, let us give good value for the money that they are willing to spend, rather than try and substitute that with public money all the time. So I agree, morally public money must be coming in for the poor children. But definitely a large number of children will be able to fund education from their parents' funds.
JP, on that, I wanted to ask you one thing. Today, what is happening is that we are waiting for children to fail in 10th standard or 12th standard, and then we're saying we'll put some amount of money into skill development for them through the NSDC and the ITIs and so on and so forth. And would it not be better to bring the skill development money into the higher grades of school itself? And this is one thing, for example, that they do in Finland that Jyoti talked about, that you bring vocational learning, skill-based learning into the formal school itself while the children are still at home. You don't wait for them to fail and then reduce their capacity to learn and then pretend to teach them something that you call skilling, which is anyway considered worthless by them. It's much better to spend that money back in the schools itself while they're still in school and give them at least a second chance at a vocation-based livelihood rather than a learning-based livelihood.
As a concept, Ashwin, it's very sound, no question about it. But I think we have to go in phases. First of all, right now, among the available unemployed pool of manpower, sorry for sexist language, Tara and Jyoti and others. I don't know what's the other expression. Human resource power, I suppose. There is so much of positive skills, even for simple low-grade manufacturing and other jobs, that we have to still take it up on a standalone basis. Even that is not happening well enough, though some resources are being deployed. So we don't have to really think in terms of money coming in from that sector to this sector. And also, as you know, in Government of India or in the states, interministerial reappropriation is always a big problem. Employment ministry fellows will not want that money to go to education. So we don't have to worry about it. We can see how to find some money for a little bit of improvement here and there in education. But unquestionably, over a period of time, unless at least from ninth grade onwards, we make some form of skilling integral to school education. And after 10th or 12th grade, we actually give them some community college route with something like the American system, and I'm sure many other countries, Germany and other countries have similar systems, whereby they can opt for a skill development course after school, but with adequate credits to be able to seamlessly go into university and get a degree to so choose, or the opportunity is available. So some such flexibility can be easily injected over a period of time. That takes time. Meanwhile, I think these two have to be examined separately.
Thank you, Dr. JP. I'm very pleased to invite Rajesh into this hangout. We have another star in this galaxy of educational experts coming onto Loksatta live platform and talking about the real issues there. Rajesh, as some of us know, is a professor of cognitive science in the National Institute of Advanced Science and is also a co-founder of the Center for Public Problem Solving in Bangalore. He is a MIT PhD in cognitive science and works on the future of learning. And Dr. JP was just talking about technology and Khan Academy and all that, and I don't think there's anyone better to answer this than Rajesh himself. So, Rajesh, we'd like your views on what is the future of learning and how are we going to scale up. We are not able to handle the current level of scale, and we are a growing country and the demographic dividend, all that. So, what exactly is in store for us?
I thank you for the kind introduction, Srinivas. It's always strange to hear yourself being introduced in these ways. The demographic dividend, so to speak, in India is about to turn into a nightmare. Right? I mean, there are so many people who are going to be very, very unhappy when they don't get the public resources that they deserve. Now, there is a huge issue to do with how to use technology. Everybody thinks that technology will solve this problem. I am both a technologist, and I think that the use of technology for learning has to be thought through very well. It's a design challenge as much as it's a technology challenge. But more importantly, it's a pedagogical challenge. Khan Academy was mentioned a couple of times in this conversation, and Jyoti also mentioned the cloud platform that she's creating. We have to ask ourselves how to scale such platforms. What are the things to put in it? I myself have been working with a friend of mine, an exceptional mathematician, Jata Ramdarai, on creating mathematics resources in the cloud in various Indian languages. It's called Gyanom. So what we have found is that we have to make these technological platforms professional. Right? You need high-end programming talent that combines with high-end pedagogical talent. But if that is done, and there are partnerships built into the school. So Ashwin had mentioned Shikshana a little while ago. See, the fact is that we now have the capacity to integrate what we are doing on the cloud, what we are doing in this kind of scaled-up technology platform with specific interventions on the ground. And what excites me really is the capacity to combine those two. I'm a mathematician and a cognitive scientist. I don't really know what the facts are on the ground in in most parts of Bangalore, let alone going into Davangere or going to Delhi, right? So there has to be a partnership between people who have some subject matter expertise with people who understand the realities of the various uh, parts of India that we are going to be distributing this education. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a trivial problem, but I do think that there are very, very robust uh, technological interventions that can be done. Now, that said, I also think that ultimately teaching is about the relationship between the teacher and the student. It's not about technology at all, right? And it's about that mentoring. It's about the capacity of the teacher to awake the curiosity of the student. And especially in a country like India, maybe at least if they can't awaken curiosity, to get out of the way of nature of curiosity in the first place. Right now, how to do this, how to make that possible. I do think that maybe the first thing that technology should do, and the future of learning really should be in the skilling of the teachers, not just of the students, but of the teachers. We have a huge paucity of high quality people, and I think that from my conversations with people in the Azim Premji Foundation and elsewhere, who are also trying to scale up teacher training in India, I think that that is a huge area that has not been addressed in the way that it should be. And I think that I see no reason why there shouldn't be 1 million new teachers in India in a couple of years, and which is what we need. We need probably 1 million new teachers every year for a few years if we are to meet the demands of our children. So, that's pretty much what I had to say. I mean, if there are any specific questions about the use of computing, I'm happy to address them.
Can I just jump in for Rajesh? I agree with you that the technology is a big thing, and if you have a good platform to load it on, then it'll be a success. If not, it won't. You're right. Yeah.
We're not at anywhere near the levels of connectivity in India to really think about technology as capable of delivering either instructive material or learning material. We just don't, I mean, frankly, I don't think we've even hit double-digit percentages in connectivity. So we completely have to rethink our connectivity strategy if we are going to bet on technology itself. And I think we spent 20 years thinking that BSNL is going to draw a line to everybody's house, and then realized that basically BSNL was preparing to wind itself down rather than wind the country up. So we've got to now move in a completely different direction that says, how do you get the infrastructure for learning in place in a very large way? I always talk about these things. We need a financial infrastructure. I mean, a physical infrastructure is the thing that everybody talks about. But we need financial infrastructure, we need knowledge infrastructure, we need social infrastructure. Without these other complementary pieces of infrastructure, we'll never get to that total developed outcome that we're pushing for through all these interventions that we keep talking about.
Yeah, and we have to collapse the digital divide. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of things. Sorry. Please go ahead.
Will you take it forward?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, no, what I was going to say is that these are parallel problems, right? I mean, of course, you have to crack the infrastructure issue. Without connectivity, I mean, it's in this day and age, not having good connectivity is like saying we're not going to build roads or things like that. I mean, that's an absolute no-brainer to invest in it. But also, I don't think we should wait for that connectivity to show up to demonstrate the effectiveness of these kinds of integrated platforms. we have to run with the wind in every direction.
I agree with Rajesh Srinivas. I'm a bit old-fashioned in this respect. Even if you have no infrastructure, if efforts are made, it's possible to educate kids to a reasonably satisfactory level. Obviously, we want the best, but the impossible best should not be the possible good. And if 10% schools have some basic infrastructure and connectivity, let's start with that. But that's only a supplement. Ultimately, there's no substitute to a teacher-student interface. We all recognize that. And it's always a chicken and egg situation. Wait for everything to happen, it will never happen. So let's not worry too much about that. Srinivas, shall we take this forward? Have some questions or something?
Yes, sir.
Please go ahead. Please go ahead. We are waiting with bated breath.
Vamsi, I think there is a problem. Srinu is not audible, so someone else has to do the connecting with the public questions.
Whoever is the anchor, Tara?
Hold on just a second. Maybe while we're waiting for that. No, there is a problem with the anchors. Hold on, JP. There is a problem with the anchors connection.
Question.
JP, perhaps I can ask you something while we are struggling with the other thing.
Go ahead.
In Loksatta, we sort of have always emphasized decentralization as a very important pillar of solutions for the country. Now, education is something that needs to be delivered in scale. But is there a tension between delivering something like that in scale and sort of bringing local communities more into the business or into the activities linked to delivering outcomes? You know what I'm saying? That is decentralization part of the answer, or is decentralization somewhat at a tension with the goal that we are seeking in scale for learning?
I believe it's a part of the answer, Ashwin, except that you can't decentralize everything wholesale. For instance, the curriculum, the nature of evaluation, if not the actual evaluation.
Yeah.
And a few other things must be centralized. But the management of the schools, the teacher recruitment, and accountability can be easily decentralized. At least a very nice synergy there. And there's only one problem I foresee. After having provincialized the teachers' services in almost all states of India, I think all states of India, please understand, teachers constitute the largest number of employees in government in this country. My ballpark number is there are probably 6 million school teachers in government in the country. And that is about, if you take away the armed forces and the railways and public undertakings, the three together will account for 10 million of Indian public employees. Out of the total rest of the 10 million employees, teachers constitute 6 million, 50 to 60%. Therefore, they have phenomenal union power. But I don't think teachers are enemies of reform. We never really bothered about articulating the need for reform and taking them into confidence. It's possible to make them accountable and yet make them partners in the reform process. So that is one element where there is going to be a problem in any reform as well as decentralization. But otherwise, I don't see any clash or any tension between centralized management of certain areas of education and decentralized management of actual schools and accountability, etc. I believe both must go together, and that's the way most countries which are reasonably well performing in terms of education are, I believe.
Considering that RTE is well known and widely known to be deeply flawed, should we sort of, begin the push to get rid of it or redo it completely? Because the longer we wait to take that step, we're just going to add to the misery of children, pretending to be educated in a system that isn't delivering that for them. I think at a very high level, including on the national government and in local electoral levels, we need to say this is a terrible law. It has no chance of working. and we just have to redo this from the beginning. I mean, do you see that as something that needs to be part of the agenda, and do you see that as something that can even pay off politically?
Ashwin, I'm always a believer that in any society, extreme radicalism will not work. It makes a nice rhetoric, but it really doesn't work. We have something going. Not everything is terrible. A lot of it is really bad. But I think our sense of what's happening in the country gives us a level of comfort because the demand side is very strong. Every parent, every educator, every education management, uh, everybody really wants success. The problem here is the definition of success. Right now, the definition is the marks and the grades in a very decrepit examination system, as well as in a very corrupt examination system. But supposing we redesign this, redefine success in a manner that the kind of outcomes that we all seek are integrated in the definition of success, I'm betting that the whole system, particularly the private sector immediately, and the parents, education management, they will all reorient themselves to deliver success because they want success. They don't care about quality. Quality is for us to integrate in the definition of success. That is to me a low-hanging fruit because the demand side is strong. We can actually alter the behavior of a large number of suppliers to really alter the outcome. And the second thing is if we simply go into voucher system because I believe it's politically feasible. Somebody like Narendra Modi or Siddaramaiah or somebody else can easily make this a politically palatable thing and say, I will give your kids education where you want at my cost. You don't worry. That's one simple thing. They realize the beauty of that politically. They may not care for education, they care for the votes. If you somehow make them realize the value of it in terms of the vote, I think that will have a profound revolutionary impact on education. And a couple of technical stuff we discussed. For instance, can we do the Khan Academy stuff? Can we have testing boards so that at least measurement becomes integral to the whole process? Initially, maybe random testing, but we all have on a much wider scale, many more levels than Pratham is doing. Not merely at the 7th grade or something, but actually over several grades, much more refined testing methods can be evolved so that we have much greater understanding of the outcomes. Though we all have anecdotal experience, I don't think there's adequate statistical evidence to really be able to say authoritatively what is happening. Pratham that way has done a great service to us, but we have to expand what Pratham is doing. And I'm told Pratham has decided to only do for 10 years. I think we must persuade Pratham to continue this but in an improved form, or else some other agency must take over the testing from now onwards. Otherwise, we won't have data to debate and to improve the system. I think there is a lot of innovation possible and intervention is possible. It must be very selective, it must be very strategic, it must be deeply thought out.
I'll bring up the question submitted by Nikhil Sheth from Pune. And Dr. J.P. Nikhil asks, what can we do to decentralize education syllabus so that what's being taught is rooted in context, locally relevant to people's lives, and not disempowering and doesn't drive them to migrate away from their native places? You would like to refer to SECMOL, Ladakh, SECMOL.
I think Srini, Jyoti is probably better placed to answer this. My own sense is syllabus. Many of us talk all the time about syllabus and curriculum. To be fair, of course, there are many flaws, but that's not really the central point of departure in transforming the educational outcomes in India. Because again, I'm not looking for a fantastic outcome in education. All the desirable things, however idealistic they are. I'm looking at simple, practical improvement in making the young kid out of school much more productive, much more self-aware, much more capable of addressing the challenges that she is going to face in the world. If the person becomes a greater human being, better personality, that much better. We're not at that level. Let's be practical. We always think of the best. I'm looking at the average. How do you really take care of the 60% of kids who are getting substandard sham education? How do we make them at least equal to the top? Jyoti said, how do we make sure that the differential is no more than 33%, not 5% and 2% and 10%? I think that should be our first point of departure. Otherwise, we will not crack the problem because no society is truly happy with the education it's delivering. There's no perfection possible. You can keep on redefining the perfection. You can keep on changing the goalposts. So let's not worry too much about the curriculum, etc. It's really about designing a mechanism to guarantee better outcomes. My commonsensical approach is that. But Jyoti is better placed, as I said. Jyoti.
No, I agree with you, Dr. JP. I think, in fact, when we were talking about last connectivity in villages, I wanted to say the people in the villages are very well educated. It is the city poor that are badly educated. So education is quite different from schooling, and we have to keep our minds on that prize, not just schooling.
I have an election. Go on.
Okay, so there are lots of questions about entrance examinations and assessment and all of that. But this one probably consolidates multiple questions. Can we not make the admissions to higher education, engineering, and other things through entrance test made completely independent of politics or government in the local area? If the local independent body takes care of things like fee reimbursement and other stipend issues, we may have an on-time and smooth admission process that saves a lot of heartburn from students. Sri Krishna from Hyderabad is asking this, but many people have asked similar questions.
Now, Srinivas, to be fair, as far as higher education admission is concerned, all over the country we have moved in a large measure in the direction of more objectivity and more transparency. Yes, the quality of entrance test is pretty dismal in many states, like MSET in Andhra Pradesh is still rote-oriented, but at least it's objective, it's transparent, and it's a fair system. We can improve the questioning. We have third-rate questioning because we have very poor systems. But again, in India itself, there are many private educational institutions doing a great job in improving the methods of testing. For instance, I know for a fact that Manipal educational institutions do a much better job than our own MSET and other things. But I think, on the whole, we are moving in the direction of greater transparency, greater objectivity, and greater meritocracy within the bounds of reservation, etc., affirmative action which is necessary in India. I don't think that's a problem. Aberrations that you find in states like Telangana and Andhra Pradesh because of the special problems, these are very temporary. We don't have to really generalize the particular problems. But all over India, I think we are moving in the right direction. And in that sense, that university education must be increasingly standardized, not uniform necessarily, but at least admission. That means any kid anywhere in the country must be able to aspire to any educational institution anywhere in the country, irrespective of the state of origin, in higher education. Is, I think, a worthy goal. That's the only thing that I appreciate in what Kapil Sibal, the former education minister, tried to do. Everything else is really sham, right to education act, etc. But certainly, some kind of a mechanism by which university education becomes universal is a desirable one. And I think even in that respect, we moved in that direction to some extent. But right now, I suppose there is some pause. But I don't see that as a big challenge.
So, some of the recent moves of the UGC, vis-a-vis, especially the private educations and even the Delhi universities move to create a 4-year program, honestly, they were not very encouraging. To my mind, it seemed like in the name of uniformity and in the name of keeping things easier for students and parents. So essentially, students, for example, don't want to write 10 different entrance examinations. That's a reasonable goal. It's a reasonable goal. But we have to be careful that the way we sort of regulate these institutions is not so that the supply itself gets disincentivized. In school education, certainly that is happening. There's a reason, I think, why 20,000 schools have closed since the education law has come into effect. We are disincentivizing the creation of more supply. And until we sort of acknowledge that and be guided by the numbers on the supply side, we're going to have this problem in scale, JP. Somebody has to teach. It's not just about education. We have said this about democracy itself. Everybody wants to consume a great democracy. Nobody wants to be part of producing it, right? And education is very similar, very analogous to that thing, that we want the outcome. But we're sort of never thinking about this from the producer's side.
No, I entirely agree with you, Ashwin. Higher education, for instance, you and I discussed it, and I think the group also must have a sense of it. This whole nonsense about UGC and its licensing and the AICTE, Medical Council, this is a disaster in the country. It is corruption prone. It is utterly inefficient. It is counterproductive. This whole idea of licensing entry must give way to some kind of certification of exit, particularly in areas where it's required. For instance, in some areas it's not required. If some university gives a degree in MA or something, there's no direct impact on people's lives. Now it's for the society to decide what value they impart to that particular degree. But if it's MBBS or something where you actually touch human lives, or if you're an architect or something, uh, your lack of proficiency could cause serious damage, then obviously some certification is required. So wherever certification is warranted, I think there must be an independent certification agency rather than this system of rat race and licensing and corruption and looking only into physical infrastructure without looking at outcomes. I think it's a failed system. I think all of us should agree that UGC should be disbanded. This medical council and the AICT and other regulatory councils must simply be disbanded. Instead, there must be certification after the course, without which the person cannot practice a profession, sensitive professions where public interest demands some kind of certification. And otherwise, let the market forces decide. But without going too much into higher education, it's an exciting field, and once we get lost in that, we forget all about school education. Ashwin is absolutely right in saying that the Right to Education Act has been a disaster. Instead of improving the quality and encouraging more providers, it actually discouraged them. Right now, the district education officer has become a tremendous profit center. And I would not be surprised if each DEO's posting in India now carries a price tag of ₹1 crore or so. Because in a 3-year tenure, the fellow can make crores now by certifying or decertifying private schools. And the certification norms under the law are so ridiculous, very much like a medical and engineering college. It's all about per child classroom floor area, the number of acres of playground, and so on and so forth. I'm not opposed to physical infrastructure, but in cities, it simply is not possible for public sector or private sector to have those ideal norms. We simply don't have that space. And where the public sector cannot provide, to compel the private sector to provide, and then to bully them and to blackmail them is the height of hypocrisy and is counterproductive. And B, the real education must be measured in terms of outcomes, not really about these things. I still go back to the old-fashioned notion. Doesn't matter if you're actually using the sand dunes rather than blackboards to teach. As long as the kid learns, that's perfect. Whatever works best is important. It doesn't matter the detailed process. You don't really micromanage it. Let the local community and the local school and the teacher decide, under the available circumstances, what is the best mode of imparting education. Don't bother too much about how they impart. Bother about what is imparted and what is the outcomes. And I think we haven't really gotten that in the education system today. And that's what we should fight for, that degree of autonomy, and therefore decentralization to that extent is vitally required.
This problem exists in every sector, JP. I sort of written the outline of a book that I call Input Nation. You know, in field after field after field, we can see that the government is obsessed with inputs and measures itself only in terms of whether it has provided those inputs, and is totally unconcerned with outputs. And you would have seen from your time in the service too, and I've seen this many times. If you go to a government department and ask them how they review themselves, they'll give you a PowerPoint presentation that essentially details all the inputs that they have been providing to the jurisdiction that they have, and even not even bother to list the most basic of the outcomes that the department is supposed to do.
Yeah, we have a question from Haima.
Hello, Dr. JP. Just to summarize what you've said, you said the stakeholders have moved out of the public schools. That's the reason public schools have gone down. But if the stakeholders have moved on to the private sector, then typically economic incentive should produce quality. That means competition should produce quality. But how come in the education sector, private schools seem to do as bad, almost as bad as the government schools? I mean, they are not on par. I mean, are not the customers? The customers would be parents, right? Are they not demanding the right quality, or they don't know what are? Is it
Hi, Mark.
What is the
Very, very critical question. Parents don't demand quality. Parents demand success. There's a huge level difference. If success is defined in a manner that quality is integral to it, then parents automatically demand quality. If success is defined as 99.9% and to get admission into either pre-university at plus two level or at university level, you require so-called cutoff mark, 99.9% mark. Parents demand 19.9% mark. For instance, I know for a fact that in Telangana and Andhra Pradesh, at plus two level, French and Sanskrit are very popular subjects. I don't know about the rest of India. Why? Because parents and kids have realized that they get 95% plus scores in these two subjects without learning a single sentence or basic syntax and grammar. Because success is defined as not learning Sanskrit and French, but as getting 99.9% or 95% marks. Therefore, parents are demanding something that is being delivered by the private sector to some extent at least. Therefore, that's why the demand side management, redefinition of success is what is important. When the demand is extremely strong, it is demand for the wrong kind of things because they don't know. That's not their fault. But they all want success. The education enterprise wants success. The teacher wants success. The school wants success. The kid wants success. If you redefine the demand, I cannot overemphasize this issue. We are so lucky that there's so much of demand for education. If only you redefine demand intelligently, and that's where an intelligent evaluation system, redefining the aspiration and success, is so critical. Then you don't have to do anything. You just sit back and relax. Well, hundreds of thousands of people in the country who are delivering education, they will bend backwards to improve the quality of outcomes if that's where you define success. I think that is the easiest thing for a sensible government leader in the country. We hardly have sensible government leaders, that's so tragic. We have to somehow make these people sensible, that's all.
The next one I'd like to ask Ashwin and then also get Dr. JP's views on it. There's a lot of debate recently with respect to some central government instructions and the Teachers' Day speech and all of that in terms of language and language of instruction. So Ashwin, what are your views on this and how do you think the country should move forward in terms of policy making and language and instruction?
It's a difficult situation. Let's all admit that the reality is parents throughout the country want certain things for their children, and the consequence of that is going to be that here and there they're going to make choices that are inconsistent with what the state thinks the children should have. Language of instruction is one such area. In every state, there is a policy of instruction that says that we must prioritize the local language of the state and give importance to it. And there are very good reasons for doing that. But given the state of public education and given the reality of the value that English commands in the marketplace, parents, with or without the approval of the state, with or without the support of the state, are making a set of choices that say, I'm going to put my child in an English language school, not because of anything else, but because this represents a road to opportunity. So now we can't wish that away. Either we have to come up with a reality in which the state policy of instruction in particular languages and learning of particular languages is also connected to opportunities that parents want for their children, or we must accept that parents have a right to make choices that are inconsistent with the state policy because they are more concerned about the welfare of their children than about the policy of the state. This, we sort of seem to go back and forth, once in a while admitting that language policy is important for cultural reasons, for historical reasons, for heritage reasons, for our identity and things like that. But we are not willing to back up that feeling by investing sufficiently in learning in the languages of the country in a way that parents will feel that it's important for them, that it's useful for them also to keep their children there. So it's become very rhetorical. Everybody says this is important, but nobody's investing in it. So the message that parents get is that this is only lip service. When the state says you should learn in the language of your state, they sort of are saying that in a political way. They themselves don't have the gumption or the commitment to that, to put the money where their mouth is and make sure the children have real opportunity through learning in that stuff, in that language. So this is the basic problem. We can debate all we want what ought to be, but until we get to a situation where there is opportunities linked to that as well, we can't expect parents to make the choices that we think are good for society as a whole.
Srinivas, before I respond, I'd like to hear Jyoti's comments as an academic.
Um, I was just going to jump in and say, being bilingual is something that sets us apart from most other countries. We are very efficiently bilingual, and we are bilingual like seals swim in water. So I start a sentence in English and I switch to Tamil, and I come back to English and I finish up with Hindi, and it's amazing. You know, my friends from other countries just stare. They don't quite know what hit them. This does two things. It develops the language center, needless to say, in the brain, but it also somehow impacts the logical center, because there's something logical about language. So it is of ultimate importance to keep our ability to be bilingual alive and well. Now, that also rests squarely in the parents' homes, because they have to speak in their first language to kids, and if they do that, then the kids actually don't make the sort of errors that you see in first language English speakers have begun to creep into our kids. There was a time when our kids were good at spelling, they were good at grammar, they didn't make any punctuation mistakes because they received English. They no longer receive English, it's their first language. So they make the same kind of mistakes that other first language speakers make. So I think it's very important to keep our bilingual ability alive and well. And if every education is made bilingual, regardless of which language it is. In Karnataka, it will be Kannada and English, of course. Somewhere else, it will be Telugu and English. So it should work. It should work.
Srinivas, if I may step in, I tend to agree with Jyoti. First of all, I don't think it's such a difficult issue. But the issue is not cultural at all. If anybody propagates a language because the language is the state of a cultural disease, I think we should emphatically reject that. However politically difficult it is or incorrect it appears, we should emphatically reject the notion that academic pursuit has to be based on cultural predilections. It is wrong. It is dangerous. It is academic. I believe that we should not really worry about our children. The middle class, upper middle class children, they may have some problems, but these are problems that these parents can deal with. The real challenge is not at this level. The real challenge is at the level of the kids who are going to government schools or the low-end private schools. About 60% of the kids and their parents. Where English is not the spoken language at home. They don't even have a smattering of English really, except what they get from television occasionally or from films, etc. And they really don't understand the syntax or the logic, and therefore they're at sea when they try and learn a subject in English. It's not about learning English language. I'm talking about learning a subject, a concept in English. There's a distinction to it. By all means, let them learn English as a language as early as they can, but let's not burden them with learning a subject in English, because then when you don't understand the syntax and the meaning and the logic, you actually lose the concept. And rote learning or falling behind, these are the two inevitable consequences. Eventually, once they grasp the initial concept, the basic concepts, in any language in which they are comfortable, the convenience may call it mother tongue, but basically the language in which they communicate with their family and friends. Initially, they learn that. Later on, to shift to English language, maybe after 7th or 8th grade, that's not going to be very difficult. It will not be a perfect solution. In any case, there's no perfect solution possible. Even if we want to educate all our children in English from day one, we simply don't have English speaking, English teaching teachers in this country. So-called English medium schools, 70 to 80% of the low-end and middle-level schools, they teach non-English knowing children in English, and oftentimes the teacher himself is non-English knowing. So it's a fraud. We are simply hoodwinking ourselves. We simply don't have enough teachers who can speak decent English and understand the concepts they're supposed to teach in English. And therefore, there's no choice but to be bilingual, but to differentiate between learning English language and learning in the medium of instruction. And I think we must limit our kids to their own language in terms of acquiring the concepts in the early stages, the first 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And slowly we must graduate them into English medium in the higher classes in school, so that by the time they come to college, they're at least reasonably comfortable, if not proficient, in English as a medium of instruction. That's the only realistic way we can pursue this. I don't see any other option available in the country because we simply don't have many English knowing teachers. Even in engineering and medical colleges, even in universities, the standards of English spoken by the teachers are appalling. Let's face that. In most colleges, most universities, the standards are appalling. They don't even know what they're speaking. So we can't really condemn our children with this kind of pidgin language, neither English nor Kannada nor nothing. It's better that most of the children whose language of communication is their local language, they're taught in that language for the first few years. Slowly shift to English. I have thought about it a great deal, and I'm not a supporter of teaching in an alien language unless they're comfortable with the language, particularly in China. It's a disaster. It's not without reason that Korea, Japan, China, many other countries only focus on their languages because they realize that academic inputs and conceptual clarity become only when you actually understand the language and its you don't pick it up in a foreign language.
It's like you defined.
What about the, Srinu, one second on this. What about the content, JP? Ultimately, teachers can only teach out of material that is available in languages. And I think that deficit has to be filled too. We can't expect an army of local language teachers to deliver something without the resources, the pedagogic resources to be able to go and deliver that instruction.
I agree with you, Ashwin, but I think that effort is being made. We are also being somewhat uncharitable because the state councils of education, research, and training, they're not sleeping all the time. They're actually doing a half decent job. They're not doing the full decent job because there's nobody monitoring and nobody really incentivizing them. Otherwise, we have institutions and structures available which are supposed to be looking at these things. And NCRT at the national is not doing a bad job at all. I mean, I'm sure they could do better. But we already have, I think, some emphasis in government as well as outside on content and teaching methods, etc. Except that they're not adequately internalized, there's not good enough training of teachers. But I don't think there's a serious deficit in content per se. I have been examining the content somewhat carefully over the last few years. Earlier, I was not paying much attention at a micro level, but my daughter was doing the school education the last few years, therefore, willingly I was compelled to pay attention. Some of it is bad, but not all of it is bad. Some of it is actually quite good.
Dr. JP, just like a lot of kids are taking Sanskrit and French, like you described, because that's how success is defined and not as quality, but as higher percentage. Isn't that what's happening with English also? That is defined as success, and whether they like it or not, whether they're actually learning the concepts or not, they want to be in English because that's how success in life is being defined to get a job or get ahead.
No, Srinivas, I entirely agree with you, and they're right. I mean, to tell the parents and children that English is not important is both cruel and hypocritical. The fact of the matter is, in our country, in any segment of our national activity, economic, political, social, or even religious, perhaps increasingly, if you are English speaking, you have a huge advantage. It's a fact of life. Forget globalization, forget world economy, so on and so forth. Simply within our society. But the fact of the matter also is the two things that we discussed. A, if the child is incapable of grasping it for no fault of hers, simply because the child is not given the opportunity to learn English as a mother tongue, then you are actually condemning the child to mediocrity. B, we simply don't have enough suppliers of education in English language, even in colleges, let alone in schools. Therefore, we have to simply muddle through it and have a bilingual system, as Jyoti said. But I believe in the first few years, While English is taught as a language, focus on concepts being transferred in a language that the child understands. I don't care what language it is. But eventually, let them easily move into English as a medium of instruction, even if it is somewhat flawed. They're not very good in terms of the ability to communicate in a sophisticated manner. If the concepts are sound, if they grasp what they're saying, what they're learning, and if they're able to at least half decently express what they want to communicate, I'm quite content for the time. I'm not expecting elegant and logical and very beautiful communication. That will come later. But right now, at least that much should be feasible, but it will not happen overnight. We simply don't have enough human resources. We don't have enough people to teach in English. It's a fact of life.
Thank you. Maybe this is for Joe, and maybe Dr. JP and Ashwin can give their views on it. But Joe, Naresh Reddy Sankapalli from Bangalore is asking, it is a well-known fact that even in the so-called best institutes like IITs of India, we don't have good teachers. The best in any field are not opting to take teaching as a profession. What can be done to attract the best and brightest into teaching?
What can I say except to tell the best and brightest, we need you as a teacher. But, the best and brightest are persuaded away by companies that sell soap and milk and so on, and they go off to join these multinational companies. Again, I hate to bring in my old why reinvent the wheel. Finland said, the mean salary of the teacher should be higher than the mean salary of the rest of the working population. And the moment that happened and they picked the best and brightest to be made teachers, it automatically improved the quality of teaching. But I have to say that I have seen some really fantastic teachers on the government school floors. The same is not true of the lower end private schools, as I said before, I think. So it's a question that is linked with social engineering. Somehow we have to make the standing of the teacher better. And if that happens, we'll get a better quality of teacher.
Srinivas, I have a simpler approach to the problem. We produce annually 4 to 5 million university graduates. Now, in a half-decent system of higher education, almost any one of them could be at least a half-decent teacher. If we always think in terms of the best and brightest becoming teachers, we are being somewhat naive. It never happens anywhere in the world, except in Ivy League universities, and we're not talking about that right? The best in America certainly don't go for teaching. The best in Britain certainly don't go for teaching. It's a myth. If an average or above average university graduate is not fit for teaching, there's something deeply, deeply wrong with university education itself. And public education, public sector, the teacher's quality is not all that bad, though there are serious conceptual lacking. On the whole, I entirely agree with Jyoti, because of the fierce competition and fairly high wage structure. I don't know if many participants in this Google Hangout are aware. In government schools in India, typically, the average wage of a school teacher is 30 to 40,000 rupees a month. I know it's not fantastic, but it's not bad at all by Indian standards. In a country where even today the per capita income is only about 70 or 80,000 rupees per annum, being able to pay 500,000, 600,000 rupees for a teacher in government is not a bad thing at all. In low-end private schools, the wages are typically 5 to 10,000 rupees, probably close to 7 to 8,000 rupees per teacher. That's the reason why they cannot afford to attract some of the better teachers. It's just a very average kind of a graduate who goes there. There's reason to improve the wage structure, not necessarily in government. But if you really value education, if they know that somebody is monitoring, somebody is saying shabash when there is good outcome, and you respect them, I'm sure there's going to be a much better outcome. The other day, when I went to a school in 10th grade, I found something amazing. These are all minority girl children in an ordinary Villa Parishad high school, 10th grade kids. I spent an hour with them, unannounced I went there. And I took a couple of topics which are slightly difficult for kids at that level. Jyoti's subject, atomic structure, electronic configuration, all this Hofbauer principle and Honslow and so on and so forth. And simple harmonic motion, I went into the concepts. What is simple harmonic motion, so on and so forth. Which is somewhat difficult, certainly, for school kids at 10th grade, definitely in public schools. I was astounded that 80 to 90% of the kids actually were very well aware. They were very sound in their concept, they were very enthusiastic. All because one very fine lady teacher joined there 3 years ago, a fresh graduate, and she was outstanding. She knew the subject to the back of her hand, and she had passion for teaching. But I don't think anybody ever bothered to really acknowledge that there was a teacher of that quality. Even after I told the education minister, the collector of the district, and many others, I don't think anybody bothered. Now, eventually, I'm sure even such teachers will dry up. We haven't created an environment in public systems to actually encourage such performance and support them. It doesn't have us with money. They're already getting 30, 40,000 rupees, which is not bad. But if they recognize value for what it is once in a while, that makes many more teachers who are not laggards take it at much more seriously. For private schools, we have to improve the quality. And unless we focus on teacher training, right now the training is a sham. Education to people to be appointed as teachers in schools, because that is what the schools are. But none of them really know even the basics of the subject matter. Or it is too harsh an expression, but most of them do not know. So we have to improve that, and then of course create a certain incentives and accountability structure. I don't think you can afford to get the best and the brightest into education. It doesn't happen. Except when you create IITs and Harvards. Even there, it's not easy because our IITs are nowhere near Harvard, let's face it. Our universities are nowhere near the best in the world. They're in the top 100 in the world. So I don't think the best in the people will go very time soon. We have to make do with the others, and we have to improve the quality of the average and really reward performance, make it worthwhile for them to do better, so that they have this self-actualization and society benefits.
So, I would add another dimension to all that, which is a lot of people are willing to teach. And I said this before, a lot of people are willing to teach, but they're not willing to go into an institution to teach in the way that the Sarkar has defined it. Only this is considered teaching and nothing else is considered teaching. Go and get your Bachelor of Education degree. How many of the 5 million kids who are coming out of college with a university education that JB recently just now referred to, how many of them will take another year and a half to go and get a Bachelor of Education degree to be enrolled as a school teacher in the public education system? That's the question we ought to be asking. If we say teacher has to meet certain criteria for being appointed as a teacher in a formal system, then we have to ask ourselves, are we ensuring that the supply in that chain is sufficiently large that the numbers of teachers that we expect to bring into the public education system will meet the demand? Otherwise, even if they have the competence, I think actually today one of the challenges is that there's a lot of people who have the competence who are choosing not to come into teaching because there isn't a legal way for a lot of them to come into teaching. It is well known that a very large number of private schools are doing well, not necessarily with teachers that have got B.Ed degrees, but with teachers who just happen to be able to teach well. Because we have removed the assessment of the outcome from all the other things in the education system, we're never moving to the point where we say if a child is performing well in an institution where the teachers happen to not have all the credentialing that the government thinks is necessary, we should be able to say that the performance of this child still counts for something, and that the lack of credentialing of the teacher cannot be such a deterrent to the enrollment of very large numbers of teachers in the system. I don't want to teach like a government teacher. I'm willing to teach a lot of people. And I think this is a position that's fairly common. I remember when I graduated from the University of Washington, I said to myself, well, I've got a reasonably good education from this institution at state expense. So I went to the Seattle Public Schools and said, I'm willing to teach for 1 year in the Seattle Public Schools, even though I know that I would get a much lower salary than what I ended up getting when I went to NASA, for example. But the reality was the school district came back and told me, well, you don't have the certification needed to teach over here. Why don't you go, get that for another 9 months? And that I certainly was not willing to do. I tried arguing with the lady that I was probably a better mathematics teacher than 90% of the mathematics teachers that they already had. But the system didn't care about that. The system cared only whether you had the certification to be the teacher. So we have to overcome that deficit as well. The irony was at the same time the state of California was offering a $30,000 bonus to anybody who was willing to sign up as a science teacher, whether or not you had the necessary certification, because they were going through a shortage of teachers in a very large number. So we keep oscillating, not just in India. Around the world, this whole institution of teaching keeps oscillating between living with reality and aspiring for the gold standard. And we never seem to find that medium in which we are actually doing well on average in scale.
Srinivas, I entirely agree with Ashwin on this. We need flexibility in recruitment. The teacher training institutes simply have not served us well at all. Most of the so-called teacher training institutes, they produce certificates. There is no dearth of candidates for teacher recruitment on account of certification requirements in India. That's not a problem because 90% of the university graduates do take teacher training in order to qualify as teachers. The number is there, but the quality certainly is not there. And increasingly, when a large number of engineering graduates are available to teach, for instance, math and physical sciences and so on and so forth, it will be stupid for us not to take advantage of their abilities. And therefore, there must be a mechanism which makes it easy for teacher recruitment. There's going to be resistance, unquestionably. Even in higher education, the same thing is happening. If, for instance, a good teacher in Harvard wants to come back here after retirement and then teach here, even free of cost, universities don't have flexibility. We created a monstrous system. But there is no shortage of quote-unquote qualified people. That is not the challenge here. The problem is the quality, certainly, I agree. And we require flexibility. I've always believed that flexibility is required. But that about. Even that will meet only a small number. How many people will there like Ashwin who are willing to go and teach? Yes, certainly many kids from ASHA and other volunteer organizations are willing to teach, but only for some time. You can't expect them to dedicate their lives for teaching alone. At this stage of our economy, that probably is a little too unrealistic. We still have to improve the quality of teacher training. We still have to make sure that there are adequate incentives, not necessarily monetary alone all the time, non-monetary rewards, so that the teacher feels fulfilled. Even the fact that somebody is noticing the performance of a teacher gives them the gratification. We're not giving them that.
Thank you. As we had anticipated, this is a mega topic, and there's so many different questions and a lot of folks wanting to talk about engineering colleges and teachers and why so many things about that. So I would like to commit to all of them. Don't be disappointed that your questions didn't get asked today because we are going to come back on this one more time. We want to do policy today. Yes, Dr.
Permit me to leave in about 10 minutes time because I have an early morning flight to catch tomorrow.
Sure. I'm just closing it, sir. I'm just closing it right now. Yeah, so as a policymakers, and Dr. JP recently was at IIM Bangalore, and he talked about the tools that any government or a politician has in terms of fixing policy. They have the laws, they have the money, and they have the apparatus, and of course they have the bully pulpit, right? So what can it that any government can do now? I think we talked quite a bit about various things. We went into policy, we went into teacher quality of education assessment. There's a lot more to bring to you on this, and Loksatta, as always, is willing to look for constructive solutions and work towards the long-term solutions by partnering with other people, partnering with politicians of all different hues and colors, and trying to make advances in our policy. So if those of you on the Hangout, those of you that submitted questions want to be involved in this process, please do join us. There is a registration link that has a way you can stay in touch with us. You can see it on the event page and also on our social media pages. The URL is bit.ly/lsp-edu-team. bit.ly/lsp-edu-team. We'll also post it online so you can join it. Thank you all for being patient, and I know many of you are hungry and some of you need to catch an early flight and all of that next morning. So I appreciate you all joining, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin.
Thank you, Srinu.
Thanks, Ahmad. Good night.
Good night, people.
Good night.